Hello, everyone. I'm your host, Zenitsu, and you're listening to the Digi Talks podcast, the show that covers various topics from news to meta developments and everything in between for the fine folks who love the Digimon trading card game. Just as a quick reminder, I do stream this live over on twitch.tv/Zenitsu, and it also gets uploaded as a YouTube video under the YouTube channel of Zenitsu, while also being on various different podcasting platforms for your viewing or listening pleasure. Today, I'm with my co host, Teddy, and we're going to be talking about our thoughts about Gen Con and the TCG bubble, along with how Digimon is basically a budget friendly game at this point. So, I guess first on the docket is Gen Con. We would love to go over the data if we had some. Some guy did post some data, but it was inconclusive and he took it down, so we no longer have access to that. So that's great. So if anyone's unfamiliar, Gen Con literally had like what, 4 or 5 events? They had an in-person event and an online event for each of the days. So that's like literally 8 events jam-packed into one weekend. So there's just too much data that people are probably still sifting through, and we'll eventually get that later.
Oh yeah, we'll see. We'll see when we get it. I kind of hope it's soon because I kind of want to look more into it, but we can't rush them. I'm not doing it, so I can't really be the one to be like, "You need to hurry up, do it."
Yeah, the only thing we really have, I think, is the online. We have like the top four, but I'd rather just save the majority of that for when the rest of the data comes out, because I don't want to like give a little bit and just miss the rest of the picture. That just it doesn't sit right with me. But I do know, in case you're wondering, Shine Greymon on Thursday ended up taking first place, and then Shine Greymon again on Friday also took first place. This is just for the online one. In person one, I have zero idea about. Um, yeah, there's just a lot of data. Bandai was extremely busy because of Gen Con.
Oh
So
yeah, from Digimon, Bandai, or Digimon, One Piece, Dragon Ball. There's a whole bunch going on Gen Con.
yeah, so much so that we actually got a little bit of news at Gen Con, which Gen Con's not necessarily known for news. So if anyone is wondering about some of Bandai's other card games, we did get an IVC article about just, the top selling card games and what's currently doing well. To sum that up, basically, Digimon for the spring quarter was in ninth place, which top 10 is still pretty good considering it's on the list to begin with. There's a lot of games that weren't on that list, I'll tell you that. And then I think overall, Digimon is the fifth biggest card game, just under One Piece, which is another Bandai card game. Which I'll take Digimon being number 5 versus not on the list again.
Yeah, it being on the list, there are a bunch of card games that don't even make it anywhere near the list, so
No, but
not gonna complain.
that article did mention something interesting that did kind of catch my attention, and it was a thought that I was playing with for a while, and that was the idea of the TCG bubble, where there's so many TCGs, not only just out already, but continuously trying to come out. I'm not even going to attempt to list them all because, one, they're too small, and two, we're about Digimon here. But the fact that there are more and more card games is interesting, but it's also scary because the market is only so big and the top three have dominated for such a long time that it's just really hard for anything else to kind of shake that foundation. Bandai with One Piece and Bandai with Digimon have been the closest I've seen shake that foundation, but even then, like the big three are the big three for a reason, and Bandai is trying their darndest to make something hit.
Oh, that'll be very hard for them to break through that top three, but I don't think it's impossible. It's just very hard. It's very hard.
Yeah,
And
because
Bandai has taken the ideology of quantity, where they just have a bunch of card games and hopefully one of them sticks.
and I definitely think that's kind of right now Bandai's like MO is they are definitely going for quantity, not necessarily over quality because they do have some really good stuff. I just think that their design after Digimon has kind of been suffering. Like you could kind of say that One Piece was their apex, and then anything after One Piece is probably just nowhere near as good as One Piece. Like you might as well just be playing One Piece,
Yeah, it's probably
because
fairly shallow.
yeah, because in Japan, they had Union Arena, and Union Arena, from what I hear, is not doing well because of the homogenized game design, where everything kind of feels similar. You're just using the same thing with a different coat of paint, and it all feels similar to One Piece. And I'm just like, cool. So why am I playing this if I could just play One Piece?
Yeah, I don't even understand what would be the point in doing that just to slap a new skin on it. That just seems like a waste of money, but I don't run businesses, so I guess I'm not a good person to get advice on from that.
Yeah, and then they're like the closest competitor to what Union Arena is trying to do, which is what Union Arena is losing to, which is Weiss
Uh,
Schwartz. Which Weiss Schwartz is a very, I'll put it in layman's terms, just very unique card game, because the whole idea is the fact that it's taking all of these IPs and having a set based on an IP. So you kind of like invest in a deck once, and then for the most part you're kind of done, and then every now and then they might update it, but most of the time they don't, and they'd rather just replace it with a new version of the deck rather than just actually update it. But like, it at least is trying to do something unique each and every time they make a set, where Union Arena, from what I was told, just feels very samey. And my big fear, which was the announcement at Gen Con, was Dragon Ball Fusion World is going to be a thing. And the Dragon Ball community is very, very divided on that game, considering they basically are splitting the Dragon Ball game into two. So you have Dragon Ball Super TCG, or CCG. Then you have Masters, which is what we currently have. And then we have Fusion World, which is going to be the new game, which basically is a simplified version of Masters that feels more in line with, again, One Piece.
that sounds kind of lame, to be honest, but
It it's
I
it's
don't
not
know.
Yeah, it's not One Piece with a Dragon Ball skin on it, because it is trying to use a lot of the same mechanics that were in the Dragon Ball CCG. It's just that game got so complicated and is so new user unfriendly that they just had to reboot it. Like literally, a lot of people were super hyped for the Dragon Ball client because the Digimon community, more specifically, was thinking, oh, when they're done with the Dragon Ball client, they could work on the Digimon client next. And I do think that the a Digimon client would be cool. We're a long ways away from that. That's even if the Dragon Ball client takes off, because right now the Dragon Ball Fusion World client is slated for, I believe, just PC in February of 2024. So we're still like 6 months away from that. They're gonna have an open beta in the winter, and they basically said, yeah, Fusion World was only created, one, to break into the Japanese market, because Dragon Ball CCG, like Dragon Ball Super, as a card game that we have, is not in Japan, which is odd. But it's one of their only card games that wasn't in Japan. Just like how Battle Spirits Saga technically doesn't exist in Japan, it's just Battle Spirits there because they still have everything.
Yeah,
But Fusion World is to break into the Japanese market, and it, like, their reason why Fusion World exists as a client and they gave up on Masters was because Masters was just too complicated. I know 5 6 years worth of cards doesn't sound like it's that bad, considering you have Bandai, Pokemon, and Magic, like, or not Bandai, Konami. You have Yu-Gi-Oh, Pokemon, and Magic all have clients with over 5 years worth of cards. So it's not like it was impossible. I do think from a programming aspect, some of the mechanics are just that obtuse and hard to program in with all of the different mechanics and micro mechanics and phases and subphases. Like the game was just bloated to the point where it probably just didn't work digitally.
They would just your turns would just take an obscene amount of time, and I think it just would not have been a very fun experience for a lot of people.
Yeah, so Fusion World is to try to trim down on that, but Fusion World is also going to have a physical card game to go with it. So with that is another TCG to add into the market that's again competing with all of the other TCGs and even itself because you have Fusion and you have Master. I'm not saying Digimon is going to get its own subvariant of the card game. I think Digimon design wise is simple enough to program for a digital client to not really like warrant a reboot, and I don't think the mechanics are that like super far out there to warrant a reboot. Like people will keep complaining about power creep, but I think like we've hit a pretty comfortable power ceiling. And I think Bandai kind of understands what the power ceiling is for Digimon, which is definitely a good thing.
It's definitely not as bad as people are probably making it out to be.
No, but
Because
the fact that we have just the sheer number of TCGs people are playing is absolutely absurd with how many's in the market, and something is going to have to give. Something. Because a store isn't reasonably going to be able to hold Friday Night Magic, let's just say Thursday Night Yu-Gi-Oh!, Saturday Pokemon. Like, they literally, there's only so much store space, let alone so much time space to fill, and like the big three already dominate a large majority of the time and the room space. So like where do all of these new card games start to fall? Like my LGS, they as an example said we're not going to be hosting Battle Spirits, where we are acknowledging it's a thing. If people want to buy Battle Spirits, we'll take it on order, but we're just doing too much to where we can't even run Battle Spirits.
that sounds that sounds awful.
Yeah, like they're already trying to make room for Lorcana, but I don't know how well Lorcana is going to stick. And then because Lorcana is sticking, or if it does stick, what's it going to be replacing? Is it going to be replacing Modern Magic Night? Is it going to be ran in conjunction, which now you need another staff member at the same time to run two separate events? Like it just starts to look more and more complicated in the TCG scene, and unfortunately, Digimon could get swept into that negative spiral where it's just like we've got to make some cuts. Digimon could be on that chopping block just because there's a lot of TCGs already out. I think Digimon being the fifth best selling game right now means it's pretty safe. I think a lot of stores, especially now with the Fusion World announcement, would sooner drop Masters and just run Fusion World when that comes out. But I don't know. Like, there's just too many. Something's going to have to give.
Yeah, I don't like that is the world we live in, but I mean, what can we do? Like, there really isn't much. Like, we kind of just have to hope that they don't do that and they don't, drop the ball because I think they have such a good thing with the Digimon TCG. But,
I think
um,
they do need to condense and consolidate, I feel like, because Bushy Road, I've said this before, Bushy Road used to run a whole bunch of TCGs and then they learned that wasn't sustainable. So they made some cuts. They made a lot of cuts. And the old game that I used to play, Buddy Fight, was on that chopping block, unfortunately. And then they tried to have me play Vanguard, and then Vanguard got its third reboot, and I was just like, I don't know what's going on here, but I'm giving up on Bushy Road. And now Weichwartz, according to the IVC chart from the latest one that we have access to, Weichwartz is actually their best-selling card game. So, what a crazy world we live in, where the flagship game is not actually the flagship game.
But that's also like a. I think they just have a lot of collecting in that game, like the
Oh,
art.
100%. Weiss Schwarz is a it has a huge collector's market, but it actually does have a pretty decent competitive scene.
Because like a lot of the content I've seen of Weiss Schwartz is really just on the collector side. So I don't know much about the actual game itself.
My friend wants to
But
keep getting me into it, and then I just am like, no, I'm good.
I won't lie, I have no interest in the game whatsoever. But the art looks really cool.
I actually
So
hate the art because it's all screen grabs, but that's licensing things. Like, there's Weiss Schwarz is its own beast, and I think that's why like Union Arena is gonna have a hard time coming out in America is because of all of the different licensing that the game would have to go through because of like the properties that they're using, who owns the distribution rights to the properties in uh like the various different regions. Like it is a licensing mess, and it's way easier in Japan for them to get away with it, which is why they do.
yeah, I'm. That's so weird. Like all that like licensing and stuff. That's such a crazy thing because there's just so much that goes into even just the simple creation of a card game aside from the actual game itself. Like it's pretty absurd how much goes into it just for them to be like, you know what, this failed. See ya, and just drop it all together.
Big companies are not afraid of doing that. uh
I mean, they got the money to throw around.
yeah, that's why literally One Piece and Fusion World exist, is because like it is a byproduct of money. Like One Piece is arguably the most popular IP that Bandai has, or like one of. So them turning it into a card game, having better mechanics than Dragon Ball, while being as simple as Digimon at times, a little bit more complex because it does have a built-in counter timing. Um,
Mhm.
like it was kind of a pseudo recipe for success, which is why it's doing better than Digimon. But as a whole, I love Digimon way more. Not only just from an IP standpoint, but I think the mechanics of Digimon, in terms of the memory gauge, is just still one of the most freshest and unique things. That is my biggest appeal to Digimon from a game design standpoint.
Interesting. Yeah, I think I'm on that same boat there. I really do just enjoy the way that the Digimon TCG is structured over the other games. And it's hard for me to like want to go somewhere else to play something else because I just don't think another game will capture me as much. At least at the current moment, I haven't found another game that captures me or encapsulates my attention as much as the Digimon TCG does. Um, that could change, but at the current moment, I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon.
I am 100% with you. I'm 100% all in on Digimon. Like, if I were to play another TCG, it probably would end up being One Piece. I do not care about Lorcana. If anyone's like curious on what Lorcana is like, basically just take Magic the
Yes.
Gathering and mix it with Keyforge. And then boom, there is Lorcana in a nutshell. I do not care. I never cared about Keyforge's gameplay, and I'm not going to be caring about Lorcana's. I might like collect a couple of cards here and there just because Disney IP, but like I don't know. It doesn't excite me. A lot of these games just don't excite me. Even like some of the indie ones that look really cool, like what was it, Grand Archive? Like that looks kind of cool, but I'm just like I don't care. I think like a lot of this kind of like TCG race to see who can create the most successful new TCG. It kind of the trend kind of started back pre-COVID with like Argent Saga and Flesh and Blood coming out really close to each other. Um, and then I think it just continued from there. With obviously the COVID break just breaking up the monotony, and MetaZoo was the only one that came out, but MetaZoo's such a joke, it's like not even an actual card game. It is a collector's fad. Don't fool, no one can fool No one should be pulling the wools over your eyes if they're saying MetaZoo is an actual game. It's not. Spoiler. But like we just had so many indie TCGs get kick funded or crowd funded and kickstarted, and then like Bandai's throwing everything into it, and like it just is, my perspective, is too much. It's too much.
There's quite a bit that goes into those games, and I think it's just a lot, and I think that they need to they scale back a bit, even if it's I don't know. I don't think they will. That's the problem. Um, just because I don't think it's in their prerogative. I don't see why they would. Um, but I mean, it is what it is. Like, I'm still gonna play the game. It's just kind of lame that we have to play second fiddle to a lot of these games, and we're kind of just like in the back burner a lot of the time, which sucks. But
Yeah, like I do think if Bandai does start making any cuts, they're going to be cutting Dragon Ball CCG Masters first, just because right now, out of the Bandai TCG spectrum, at least in English, that game is going to be doing the worst, just because Fusion is the reboot that the game so desperately needed, and why, like, they said that they're going to be continuing support, but they're obviously going to put more love and attention into supporting the new hotness rather than yesterday's old baloney.
oh yeah,
I mean, we've
they
seen it
don't.
with One Piece and Digimon. Like, it feels like they put so much more attention into One Piece over Digimon that, like, this year in Digimon just feels so off compared to last year.
I mean, we could look at prize support. There's a whole bunch of things we can look at that
Prize
indicates that
support.
they care more about are showing more attention to one over the other.
Yeah, like between prize support, the number of events, even the types of events, like we know all the way through what, October, what our events are for online, and maybe a couple of in-person ones will sprout up here and there, but we know through October what the majority of the events are, and there's one event that's like actually shockingly missing, and that is the Grand Prix. Usually they do Grand Prix at around Gen Con. Gen Con didn't have a Grand Prix this time. And then they'll have the Grand Prix rerun for everyone else who wasn't at Gen Con or didn't pay to do Gen Con online. They'll have the rerun in October, November. And the fact that here's all of the October events and no Grand Prix, did they just cut Grand Prix entirely?
Yeah, I don't know. That's really weird. I didn't even think about that. Yeah, we haven't seen those in a while.
Because they've only
Like,
ran two. The first one, which was All Force, and then the second one, wasn't the second one Gallant? I want to say, I don't even remember.
oh my god, yeah.
I could swear,
Jesus.
no, it was Gallant. Yeah, the second one was Gallant. The first one was All Force. So like, I don't know what they're planning on doing, but that's a whole event series that they just seemingly cut. Like, as a person who has their invite, like, I don't care about Ultimate Cups, but I would care about Grand Prix if Grand Prix was the mainstead format and if the prize support was just as good as in the past, which has been a little bit higher price tag, but it came with like some decent entry promos. Um, it came with a playmat and it came with sleeves. And I was just like, those sound like good starting baseline prizes. And then just like Ultimate Cup, you have the different evolutionary line that it's going to be supporting. So it's just like I have the best of everything in terms of prizing, and I like the fact that it's absent is kind of scary.
Yeah, it makes me kind of sad because we are definitely in a kind of precarious area. Because it's not like I think that things are going to be bad per se. I just think that they're slowly but surely doing things to make it less so for us, and I think that kind of sucks
But
because I don't think that should be the case for us. I think
no,
it
and
should be
that's
okay.
why like the idea of this TCG bubble, even within Bandai's own walls, seems like it is impacting everything that they're doing because their resources are too thin because they have too much going on. And if Bushiroad, in all of its trials and tribulations, has taught us anything, like too much is actually a bad thing. But you need just the right amount of stuff to keep things interesting and varied. Like if they literally just had uh, Dragon Ball, Digimon World, Dragon Ball, World Fusion, Digimon, One Piece, and Battle Spirits, I think they're fine. They don't need anything else. But the fact that they have like 2 to 3 others on top of it is, it's just like it's too much. On top of all of the competition that's out there, it's I don't know. So something is going to have to give in my perspective.
Yeah, I don't know.
But
I
on the flip
really,
side, Digimon, I still think is in a really good spot. Obviously, the IVC data is good, and from just a like player standpoint, the game is actually very accessible. Like it's shockingly accessible to be able to build a competitive Digimon deck and be able to shuffle up and play, because I've seen this question asked across the internet so many times. I'm new to the game. Where do I start? I am a budget player. What do I make? And the answer to both of those have kind of been basically the same, where it's like, cool, you just buy/build anything. Like the game entirely is almost budget friendly at this point because of how it's set up. And I love the fact that it's this new player friendly, where we're getting a whole bunch of new people and it's very easy to be able to pick up literally almost any competitive deck and be able to play. I think like at this point the 3 most expensive decks is like what? All Force, Royal Knights, and Security Control, and that's because of the heavy usage on secret rares, promos, and older cards.
just about. I think that's basically it. I mean, I don't think we really have much in terms of like expensive decks. I don't think that's really a thing at the current moment. I don't think we have like there's so little. Like there's definitely not enough for it to be like that like to where it would be a problem where people are like, "Oh no, we can't do this because XYZ."
Like I even
It's like
think the ever infamous Greymon deck, like you could build some variation of red black Greymon and have it be competitive ready for what, under 100 or under easily.
yeah, pretty easily. I don't think it'll take that much like at all actually. It's quite a cheap deck. Like aside from a few things, but there's been reprints and some other things. So a lot of the cards, even like the promo Agumons and things like that, they've gone down in price
And some of it
just
you don't
because of
even
it.
need because they just get phased out for some of the newer tools, which because they're
Yeah,
newer
coming up.
tools, they're cheaper.
Yeah, exactly. Coming up soon, a lot of that stuff will get phased out, like the promo Agu. You won't need it because the new BT14 Agumon basically is the promo Agu, just an SR, except better because it allows you to evolve for free. So it's like there's a lot of like I don't that argument I don't think is valid at the current moment unless something comes out that maybe changes that. I don't think that that's a valid thing to say. Um, which I mean, maybe there's like I would need to see evidence of that because I just like me as somebody who both of us we just spend absurd amount of money on cards. Um,
Yeah, but that's because we buy a case and we choose to make bad decisions for fun.
yes, that is, but exactly what I'm saying. Like that is something that is not even necessary. Like if we do it just for the sole purpose of seeing, how much what we can get, the big hits like Ghost Rares, things like that, just fun. But in all honesty, there really is no need to go deep with this game because everything's so cheap. Like buying a deck is not expensive at all. Like there are plenty of meta decks that are very, very strong that you can. I think all the decks actually, for the most part, excluding the three he mentioned, and then maybe Gallantmon. But that's not really the most meta deck, so you can kind of count that out. Um, and like Beelzemon, just a start to you can just get the advanced deck, and that basically is all the stuff, and then a few extra pieces here and there. But for the most part, that deck is basically predominantly built just from there. Uh, Shine Gray is pretty cheap at the current moment. Mirage Galgamon's dirt cheap. It gone up a little bit because of the hype, but then it died down again. And then like Royal Knights would probably be like your only thing because you have to run a lot of secret rares. You have to run bare minimum 6 of the secret rares from this set. But I mean, if you're not playing that deck, like Balfamon is absurdly strong, and that deck is dirt cheap. Like
And
it's
it's really funny because there's a lot of not competitive decks that are actually shockingly more expensive than competitive decks.
yeah,
So like your Belfamon example, like what Belfamon is, let's just say $4 a card on the generous side. I've seen them as low as two.
I was
Um,
like, you're crazy, bro. That shit is dirt cheap. That
yeah,
is
so like even at
nothing.
the highest, $4 a card as your most expensive card outside of Memory Boost, outside of Purple Memory Boost, like your starting entry point is $12 or $16 if I'm using the $4 example. I don't know how much Purple Memory Boosts are as an example, but even if I just say $3 a copy for Purple Memory Boost, you only need like two of that card. So like your starting place to enter the deck to be able to build the rest of it, because the rest of it is literally commons and uncommons and rares, is like sub $20. So the fact that you can build a competitive deck for probably about 30 maybe $40 on the high end is like absurd. Like I don't know of any other game that realistically you're able to do that. And it's not just Belfamon as a isolated incident, because like let's just say you wanted to play Ravemon. That deck is way more expensive and it's way worse. So
It's like 100 times worse.
yeah, so it's like why would you waste your time outside of the fact that you like Ravemon and you like the mechanic that he's doing, even though the deck doesn't have a solid win condition and you're just getting it for the Digimon. Like why would you spend twice the amount on Ravemon just because the EX4 Ravemon is like $8 versus $4 for a Belfamon? Like it actually doesn't make sense. And like there's a whole bunch of highly meta competitive decks that are literally like $50 you could build and you're competitive ready out of the gates. Hunters is a good example of that. Um, you could probably build red hybrids for less than 50. You could probably build cross or even blue flares. Blue flares might be a little bit more expensive, but like they're still not hundreds of dollars. Like I can't even think of a whole lot of decks that even would be $100, just because the majority of the value in Digimon is all consumed up by the alt arts, promos, and secret rares. Those, if like the less your deck uses of those three types of cards, and one of them is not even a real type of card because it's just alt arts. So the less promos and the less secret rares your deck has, the cheaper it's going to be, which makes it even easier to enter the game. Granted, there are some older cards that are going to be a little bit more on the expensive side just because they're out of circulation, and they are just a little bit harder to get because of their age and the set that they came out in. But a lot of these newer decks are trying to be focused around being able to be built inside of the new block. So Digimon actually does have a block structure, and they have a little number on the card that says what block it's a part of, whether it's I think it's in hexagon, but it'll say like this is block 2. So like you just stick to decks that are in block 2 starting with the first one, you should be good to be able to build something.
Yeah, I don't. there's like zero problems for the most part in terms of like building a deck. The hardest thing you'll probably have to do is find the deck you want to play.
Yes, that definitely is going to be the biggest challenge is the deck, but I think like the fact that people are still talking about price when price is almost a non-factor at this point because of how cheap the vast majority of decks are, like it is more not what or like how do I get into the game? It's more of just finding what you want to play getting into the game.
Yeah, I think uh, I think that is true for the most part in most instances, since you're basically just banking on like what I mean, and it changes. Of course, the meta changes, but like even if we look at like, for example, Shine Greymon, which is quote unquote best deck in the format, um, that deck isn't really that expensive. Like, it really isn't expensive at all. Like, it's you probably spend a good 60, $70 maybe, and that's because of the BT12 Shine plus Marcus from BT12. But like, other than that, everything is pretty cheap. So like, I don't. You said it earlier. There's really no way that like you can look at this game and look at other games and be like, oh, this is not budget friendly, when you can build literally, quote unquote, the best deck in the format right now for. Let's look at the price breakdown. Yeah, this is dirt cheap. So I'm looking for, these are all dirt cheap, 50, 60 plus that. So for $89, around $90, you can build quote unquote the best deck in the format. What other like major card game can you do that?
There's not a whole lot. I think like Vanguard, you're able to build
That's not
some.
true.
That's not true.
I've
Oh,
I've been playing Vanguard quite a bit, and I'll tell you right now that is not true.
I thought
Whoever
Vanguard
tells
was
you
a little bit on the cheaper side because of how they
the product itself is, but like getting cards, like if I was just like, oh, I'm gonna go buy singles, bro, the singles are inflated like a mother.
didn't
I
they
don't know.
just change the pull ratios on some of the cards to make it even harder to pull?
Yes, it
And
is. It is bad. Like in terms of like cards that like you need are like expensive. Like singular cards are like $20, $30, and that's like a common occurrence. Um, just and it's because of the amount of cards in a pack. You get less in a box, because the boxes are just smaller. Like you don't get the normal 24 packs, things like that. Um, they also just make smaller boxes, and the pull rates are worse um, in a box. So it's like there are some decks, of course, that you can play, and you have some mild success with them. But the better decks are definitely not cheap.
I think like maybe the only other competitive TCG that probably would be this cheap then would be Pokemon. I remember one of my local guys, he was actually getting out of Digimon to play more Pokemon. He didn't exactly say why, but it's unfortunate that I lost him to Pokemon. But he was saying like, yeah, you could probably build like this. This was like a couple of months ago before rotation or whatever. You could build like the competitive Lugia deck for about 100, and that's like the best deck of the format. So like I think Pokemon's got some pretty comparative pricing in terms of like how friendly it is to enter the game. And I think part of that is one, set design and block design and pull rates, and then two, deck design. So Digimon doesn't have a whole lot of true staples. So like you look at a game like Yu-Gi-Oh, and half your deck is going to be generic staples that you have to run for the meta, because if you don't, I don't know what you're doing. Um, but that's because of the design of the game is completely different than a lot of other stuff, where it's just like you have your generic staples, and then you have the deck's actual core and actual engine to make you win the game. And Dragon Ball Super kind of is in that same type of boat, where you have your deck's colored staples, and then you just have the little engine or core that fits best with your leader. Digimon doesn't really have that. Digimon just has the Digimon, and most of it comes from within the same block that you're investing in. So, like, within this current block, if you invested in, let's just say, Bloomlord, you got Bloomlord from BT10, updated him in EX3, updated him again in BT11, updated him again in BT12, even though the BT12 update was like maybe 1, 2 cards at most. But it's still something to keep the deck alive. The deck is still very meta relevant and playable. And then now here we are again in BT13, getting yet again another couple of cards to help update the deck. Like, you invest in the deck kind of once, and then it should theoretically carry you through the rest of the set, if not beyond, depending on the type of deck that you're getting in. And you don't need a whole lot of the old cards from the older sets, and especially now, you basically almost don't need anything that's not built with inside of the current block that we're in.
No, you really don't. Like at the current moment, it kind of is just that way, and you don't need to go that far out because like if we're looking at just like decks that are good at the current moment, like why would you need to go out of your way to get like the worst decks? Like you could go back and there are some decks, but like most of the best decks at the current moment are from the newer sets, so you don't even need to really go out of your way to go like back that far. Maybe there's like a few outlier cards that you need to pick up from like further to back, but for the most part, you could just pick up like new cards and be good to go. And since those new cards will tend to be cheaper because there's more in circulation at the current moment, uh, you're usually pretty well off.
That is 100% true. Like, Digimon, don't get me wrong, we have our staples, like the training cards that are going to be coming out in BT14. We currently have
Mm-hmm.
memory boosts. There's a whole bunch of tamers for each color that like are just generically that good. But a lot of the time, the deck's core or engine is going to be 90% of the deck. So you're not super heavily reliant on those staple cards as much as other TCGs when it comes to how they're going to be used.
Yeah, we don't have too many. I mean, there's far and few some like tech cards that you can just throw into just about any deck, like Death X and things like that. But like even that's kind of fringe because it's not something you throw in every deck. And some decks use it better than others, and like the only cards that like you stated were the memory boosts. Eventually, when we get them, the training. Um, I mean, some tamers. I guess technically you can use any tamer in any deck, but like some of them are just not beneficial for you, so there's not really a point in that. Um, and since we don't follow I mean, the game uses color, so you have to follow a specific color in order to meet certain requirements to use the card. So it's like you kind of are shoehorned into whatever it is your archetype you're playing, and the archetypes just build themselves for the most part. Um, so it's hard to deviate and have your own like flair. Like there's only realistically like for example, the Shangri-La deck I'm looking at has like an option card or two that most people don't run, but like other than that, it's essentially all going to look the same as any other Shine Greymon deck, except for maybe a few ratios here and there.
I mean, like, that's why when certain decks get over supported, that's usually like not necessarily the greatest sign of things, because now that deck is just never going to die. And they, like, if it actually is too good, like we have been seeing with Red Black Greymon, it's like, what do they reasonably hit? And then whatever they hit just actually doesn't matter anymore because they just use the last known best tool, and then the deck is still fine. Which is its own problem. But certain archetypes do have more creative liberties and flexibility and freedom than others, but that's mostly because it's not a full archetype. Like, it's not fully supported with 2 to 3 full evolutionary lines you could think about utilizing, and it might not even have a good top end. Like there's various factors to like certain decks you have to be creative in order to make work, which is kind of cool. So it's like we still have that creative void to try to do some new and different things, but in terms of like the competitive known decks, most of the time you just stay in your lane and the deck half builds itself. The deck, most of it is going to be 90% there within the last couple of sets, and it just makes for a very easy entry point into the game, especially if you're looking to play competitively.
Yeah, that's why I like our game at the current moment is very easy to get into. Like I just find it hard for anyone to be like, no, this game is not affordable, or it's the product is there, uh, the price is good. Like it's now if you don't like the way the game plays, that's a different thing altogether. That's completely understandable. But like I I implore you to try because the memory system is super cool, and we're in a at the current moment the game is in a healthy spot where a lot of things are good. Um, there really isn't downsides to a lot of decks. Like every deck has like their weaknesses and things like that. But like I can play pick up Mirage Gal and steamroll people. I can pick up Shine. I can steamroll. I can pick up Alpha if to a lesser extent steamroll Royal Knights. Like all these decks are good. And there's a lot of them at the current moment that are actually playable, which not a lot of TCGs can say at the current moment.
I mean, we'll have our usual consolidation of like the top 5 decks, but
Duh.
that's normal. But like I always am under the impression that with the Digimon TCG, we are kind of like in a waterfall approach to our meta where it's just like the newest hotness is most likely to end up being the most successful. But the last set's darling is also still going to be highly competitive. It has not gone anywhere. It has not phased out. Maybe the matchups change a little bit, but like it's still going to be like a super strong deck. And when the new hotness comes out, usually that deck ends up getting cheaper because people want the new hotness. So like picking up last set's darling isn't even going to be that hard or expensive if you still want to maintain some competitive viability. And depending on the deck that you pick, sometimes it'll have more room for updates and upgrades than others. But at least like in Digimon set design, they're still trying to have at least one playable deck you could build right out of the box. Maybe not directly out of one singular box, but one competitive deck you could build out of the set almost entirely. Royal Knights is that for BT13. Hunters was that for BT12. Like the EX sets, they're usually going to be weaker, so I'm not going to be like completely counting them. And most of the time, EX sets, the decks aren't even that super competitive, but like they still will follow that same type of design where they'll have like one playable deck out of the set that is still going to be good if you just invest only in that set. So it makes it really easy to be able to pick up most things. And again, if as long as you stay away for the most part from secret rares and promos, you should be good to go in terms of like having a cheap, affordable deck. Also, stay away from purple because sometimes purple cards like Demi Marimon, just because of like the utility that purple has being unmatched by any other colors, those cards tend to be a little bit more spiky than others.
Yeah, there. I mean, purple just has that uh, unfortunate side effect where a lot of the cards bleed into each other's archetypes. So it's like a lot of if you pick up a lot of cards from purple, they probably will end up being used in a lot of the other decks. So it's just both a good thing and a bad thing, but depending on how you look at it.
Yeah, and that's what makes Digimon like super accessible because like I could probably just if I really wanted to just build a whole bunch of bulk decks for people and just run some events and they just need to invest a little bit extra into turning the bulk into competitive and then they're good to go. Even some bulk decks can still be highly competitive because like you could still kind of build Mirage and some of the other decks on the cheap using some of the other tools. Will it be as effective or efficient? No. Even decks like Ulforce, you could still kind of build on the cheap. Um, but like that just goes into how accessible Digimon can be as a card game, and I think in this day and age with all of these TCGs in the market, accessibility is a huge, huge, huge thing. If your game is not accessible, nobody's going to play it because nobody can access it. And right now, Digimon is definitely one of the more accessible card games on the market.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. I don't think I think it's not close, to be honest, but um, that's just me. It might be just biased.
But one thing I do kind of wish that they would do, and this is like the difference in level of care that they have for their games. I know a lot of people have been asking for separate ban and restriction lists for North America and Japan, or like English and Japanese, I should say, for a while. I just learned that One Piece actually just started doing this. And I'm just like, so everything that the Digimon community wants, the One Piece community has, and I'm just like, I don't understand. Why can't we have parity between the games, and why isn't there consistency on how they're treating each of the different games? Like, come on, Bandai, is it really that hard? Because uh there's like they're already in set 3 and they're already banning and limiting cards. We didn't get that till set 4. So I think like Digimon actually is a meta-wise started off way healthier than One Piece. One Piece also had like some really powerful stuff out of the gates, and Digimon kind of really didn't. Like a lot of the 1.0 and 1.5 stuff are relatively tame compared to One Piece's like sets 1 through 3. Um, but I digress. Like that game has its own set of issues that I'm not 100% familiar, but I do know that Bandai did start to separate the English and Japanese formats, and I think like Digimon would benefit from this because of like when they're releasing product and how they're releasing products, because we'll get promos that we should reasonably get that Japan got during this time, that we just won't have, and that will have impacts on our format. Sets being released slightly out of order in terms of the reprint set, because that had some new cards and those decks could have impacted our current meta, but we didn't. So like we're not on enough parity to where I think we could reasonably have our own separate ban and restriction list.
Yeah, I think I don't know. I'm a little weird with that because it's like it can go either way, but I don't know. I would have to keep looking at the lists and kind of evaluate because I mean, we haven't really gotten anything that I think is too crazy at the current moment that requires it besides a few small cards here and there.
I don't
But
I don't think we need it either, to be 100% honest. A broken card's a broken card, as Bandai's already stated, and they're not afraid to kill decks that aren't even played just because the card is broken and could impact design space in the future.
Calling from Darkness, yes.
I was thinking more of Melga because promo Where Garurumon all the way back from the beginning of the game. You look at that card and try to use it inside of the new Melga stuff that's been coming out, and whoo boy, that deck would have been able to do quite a lot of damage.
Yeah, I think, and the thing is, it's essentially getting the same card back. Like in the level 5, the new one, the purple one, it's
I mean,
essentially the
it's
same exact card. It's just you don't you don't get security +1. That's the only difference, which matters quite a bit.
that matters a lot actually.
But it's essentially the same exact card. Unsuspend, swing, unsuspend, Evo,
Yeah, I think it's
unsuspend.
just the security tech plus put that over the edge for them, and they didn't want to have like 5 different ways to unsuspend, and then on top of that have security attack plus. On top of that, make it harder to kill. So I understand the compounding factors. Now that
Yeah,
we finally see the ramifications of what that card's design was leading us towards, just like how Jesmon, its ban and limit made no sense. to some. To some, it still doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but like looking at some of the new tools that we got later down, we're like, oh, that's why. Um, but speaking about looking about cards down the line, and talking about accessibility, I know we are getting a reprint set. We had to fight for the reprints to be inside of the set. We don't know if the reprints were going to be in a separate product or not. We won't know that anymore. But reprints is something Bandai is absolutely insanely good at, almost to a fault, where they will reprint cards constantly, even garbage ones we don't even want or care about. Um,
God.
yeah,
Yeah.
and now that we're gonna have the reprint set, reprinting a lot of like basically the best hits from Block Zero, that's gonna make the game even more accessible now than ever. If you are just entering the card game and looking to pick up some of those old good cards, there's a couple of cards left out, but for the most part, it does just have the greatest hits from Block Zero, which is sets 1 through 5 or 1.5 through 5, or
Oh
1.0
yeah.
through 5.
Yeah, 1.0 through 5. Which I mean, no complaint here. I mean, those memory boosts are nice. They'll be pretty. Nice new foil. Some old secret rares like Magna Angemon,
Lucimon.
uh, Lucimon. I mean, and that's it. I don't think Lucimon's that badly priced right now, but I think it'll drive it down even harder now um, with that reprint.
Hey, they'll
Um,
eventually have a fully fleshed out Lucimon deck. We have the card slowly coming, so something's bound to happen. We just don't know what, and we don't
yeah,
know when.
I mean the Lord Knight and the Dynasmon, they're there, so they do function with Lucimon. So I'm interested to see what happens with that. But
Yeah,
what other big reprints? The
yeah, the Tamers,
Tamers,
and
the
then
big ones.
yeah, like it's if you're new to the game, that's probably like one of the better sets to get. Sure, it doesn't have a whole lot of like insane value cards, but you're also getting some new cards for like Gamamon and stuff, which leads me to like my last rounding point. Like even though we're getting the reprints and it's nice and that will drive the price down, we have zero idea how that set's going to behave pull rate wise, because the larger the set, the worse the pull rates. And I absolutely hate already how Bandai does promos. I think like how Bandai does promos is absolutely stupid. They do not time them correctly at all to fit when they're actually supposed to be played for the decks, when they're relevant. And like Bandai just really needs to do a better job at printing promos, let alone reprinting promos. Like that's just a Bandai problem through all of their games though. They've never done promos correctly ever.
Yeah, those rookie promos would have been sick like 4 sets ago. Like they would have been so good.
Yeah, and even though the
Like,
memory boosts won't get their alts inside of the set, I think they're getting their alts inside of like what EX5. I think
is
they're
it there?
we're
I thought they were
eventually getting them.
getting.
No, they're not in the reboot. That was a specific talking point that they had on the distributor website where the memory boost will
Yeah,
not be in there.
I
But
thought
we are
the
getting them
alt
in.
arts were gonna be in like one of those boxes.
No, it's gonna be in EX5, I believe. They're regardless. We know we're
That's
getting them. We just
lame.
don't know when we're getting them sometimes, and that's part of the problem. Like again, it's just the Bandai promo problem. They've never done this stuff correctly. I'm not expecting them to start getting it correct. They do it once correctly, like once in a blue moon, but I'm not holding my breath, and it sucks because it does keep some decks competitive viability back from being fringe viable to borderline unplayable at times.
Yeah, I mean, like, as for example, like this Gamamon deck, we would have been able to play it this set had we had the reprint set when it was supposed to come out.
Oh, yeah, yeah, that's right. The memory boosts are supposed to be in some other type of product and they're going to be
I
randomized, which is
thought,
crap.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I thought. I thought they were gonna be in like there was a oh man, it's like one of those like those adventure boxes and shit. That's what they were
Yeah,
supposed to be in.
but get 2 packs and we'll give you a promo. They've done that before with Dragon Ball, so no shock that they're doing it again with Digimon.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean that's what I kind of thought was going to happen. Which I mean I'm not opposed to it. It's just it's like whatever. I mean,
I mean, we
what are we
just
gonna
we just
do?
can't win when it comes to promos, and Bandai will just be Bandai, and we unfortunately just have to suck that up.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think so. Yeah.
But overall, I do think like if you are looking to get into the game, now is an insanely good time to get into the game because there's so many competitive viable decks. Prices on a lot of things are probably at their all-time low in terms of like being able to build something and just make something playable. You do have to do a little bit of research, obviously, in terms of like looking up stuff, but I think like the Digimon community has done well enough at being able to lay out its resources where you reasonably could find whatever you feel like you're looking for, whether it's YouTube, whether it's various websites, whether it's looking at Japanese data, like it's all there. And it's like the community for the most part in my experience has been pretty chill and welcome. I haven't really faced a whole lot of like stickler type opponents in my online events that I play in, but like outside of online events sometimes being hard to get into sometimes, like I don't think being a competitive player is like super difficult, especially if you're starting from scratch.
Oh no, I don't think so. I think our community is quite helpful. Like I think we have a lot of good apples, and a lot of people are willing to teach, which is super cool.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, most of the bad apples just dog on silly questions. And when I mean silly questions, I mean more like redundant questions that you probably could have just Google searched.
yeah, that's yeah.
And that's like, in my perspective, the worst that the community kind of gets. Like, we just dog on that. But that's because it is literally like painfully obvious and silly. So, but outside of that, like, I think the Digimon community is insanely helpful at making sure you could get what you are looking for when it comes to getting started and doing some of the initial research.
Yeah, I think that we have a pretty solid group of people. I think our community is dope. So hopefully it stays that way.
I think
And
it will. We're pretty chill. But I don't know with all of the new TCGs how things are going to be changing. I don't know what kind of level of support Bandai is going to be willing to give what, especially in the face of all of these new TCGs on top of trying to support all of the TCGs that they have. Because it seems like they're already kind of stretched super thin. So hopefully things will get better. Things are already pretty good. And I just wish that they would time things a little bit better when it comes to when we're getting like some of their promos and stuff. But hey, at least the game is cheap, it's accessible, it's readily available. There's tons of players waiting and wanting to help. Building a community shouldn't be super difficult. Maintaining one, that's a different question
I
entirely.
was like, completely different. I don't know.
Yeah, because I've had my own local community had some successes and struggles. Right now we're in a struggle period, but I think again that's due to all of the different TCGs. A lot of my players have been hopping over to other card games, trying them out, seeing what they like. Um, but that is just going to be normal and the nature of things. I think like at worst, Digimon is still a really good secondary game just because of how cheap it is.
Yeah, I don't even think it's I don't even think it's close in terms of a lot of other games, to be 100% honest. So
But yeah, hopefully next week we will have all of the data from Gen Con. I think we're going to be entering Ultimate Cup season for a hot minute until we get into September, October. Then it's gonna flap back to Nationals. I know Store Championships are on the horizon, so it's just a really exciting time. We're gonna be in BT13 for a while, but so far the BT13 meta seems pretty healthy.
I mean, I'm having fun. So I don't know. I like this meta, but that's just me.
So, yeah, that is all of the time that we have this week. I want to give a huge shout out and thanks to everyone for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and want to help support the podcast and the channels, please make sure to share with others on social media, post about it, and leave your rating, review, follow, subscribe, whatever it is on the different platforms that you're choosing to listen on. And I want to thank you all again, and I will see you, or we will see you, in the next episode.